I remember once having a very difficult conversation with a colleague when there was a crunch vote, when I think the Lib Dems weren't with us, in which case it got very tight. And I said to a colleague, well, could you have your chemotherapy on a different day? Now, there aren't too many jobs where somebody who's undergoing cancer treatment is expected to postpone that treatment just so they can come into work.
This is the exit interviews with dozens of MPs standing down at the next election. We ask, why are they leaving us? Today, Sir Robert Goodwill, the Conservative MP for Scarborough and Whitby since 2005 and chairman of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. Robert, welcome to your exit interview.
No, thank you for inviting me.
So, first question, I suppose, to be asked in an exit interview, why are you leaving us?
Yeah, funny, if I was a doctor aged 67, you wouldn't be saying, why are you leaving the profession? You know, I mean, it's a 5-year contract. It will take me to 72 years of age. And I've got lots of other things I'd like to do. We've got a farm, obviously. I've got some hobbies, and we've got 2 fairly little grandchildren now. So it was always a plan to sort of leave around about now. I've been paying extra into my pension, so I'm retiring on the full pension. So why not?
Well, I suppose because if you look elsewhere, you're young to be a politician. If you're in America, you'd only just be starting to think about running to be president.
Yeah, and I think those 2 should have retired a long time ago as well, maybe. But no, I've been in this game now for around about 25 years. I was in the European Parliament before I got into Westminster, and that's a lot of weeks going away. You know, I never went to I think I went to one parents' weekend for my kids when they were at secondary school. I spend a bit more time at home, spend a bit more time. I've actually we've got a farm up in North Yorkshire. Next year's our 175th anniversary on that farm. I actually bought a brand new tractor, which is unusual for me, so I'm looking forward to driving that. And I've got some steam traction engines, which one of which needs a lot of work, and they all need a little bit of work all the time anyway. So I'll be throwing myself into that as well.
We'll come to your collection of traction engines in a bit. What brought you into politics? Because like you said, you were in the European Parliament first, before Westminster. How do you go from being, you said, coming from a long line of farmers to then throwing your hat in with politics?
Well, I'd not really thought about politics too much. I mean, my mum was always the secretary or the treasurer of the local Conservative branch in the village, and I was very involved in politics at school and particularly at university. As I was doing my finals at Newcastle University, it was the election campaign when Margaret Thatcher got elected, and we did go out with other students knocking on doors. So I've always been very political, but I never really thought I'd end up in Westminster or Brussels, maybe on the council. And then there was a by-election in 1986 when John Spence, the member for Rydale, had died, and we'd lost that by-election by a massive margin, a bit like things that happens now. The Liberal Democrats took the seat, and the local association said, we need a local man, we need a local candidate, and I rather naively threw my hat into the ring. I think there was 200 applicants, and I came second. And that was a big surprise to me because I thought I would be a sort of a non-runner, so to speak. And I was sort of advised. John Greenway got selected and he became the MP 13 months after that by-election defeat. And so I thought, well, yeah, I might have a go at this. So I applied for a seat for the 92 election in Redcar. First seat I applied for I got, and sort of I've been either standing for election or getting elected ever since.
You were beaten by Mo Mowlam back then.
Yeah, she was lovely. Yeah, I mean, on the Saturday night before polling day, it was the mayor's ball in Redcar. Now, don't get the impression of sort of balls you might have in London. It was in this sort of leisure centre, and I know at they played the last waltz, and Marjorie and I got on reasonably well. I said, well, we shouldn't disappoint them. Let's have the last waltz together. So the picture in the papers on Monday morning was Mo and I going round the dance floor. She did pinch my bum, actually. I think these days it would be quite a serious thing, but I said something a bit facetious, I think, and she dug her nails in quite hard. That's not the sort of thing you can do now.
Does that tell us something about something that's been slightly lost in politics? Now we get actually both sides of politics throwing abuse at each other, quite personal vitriol. I feel like we're a long way from every candidate dancing the waltz with their political opponent the weekend before polling day.
Well, what you see in the chamber isn't necessarily, what you see in the tea room or down in the strangers' bar. And I think a lot of us have very good friends on the other side. I mean, Tony Lloyd, who just died. Tony's a great guy. We both have bus factories in our constituency, so we work very hard to ensure that when local authorities buy buses, they buy British buses, not Chinese buses. So we have a lot of good friends on both sides, and don't be taken in too much by what happens at PMQs.
Before we get sort of to Westminster, what was it like being an MEP, and how did it contrast with being an MP? Because I remember certainly the start of my career covering politics, trying to get your head around what was going on in Brussels and who really mattered and where the power really lay. And actually quite a lot of power lay there, but nobody knew, it was far less accountable, it seems, than what was happening so compare your two lives.
Well, when I arrived in the European Parliament, I had a very big dose of imposter syndrome because I hadn't expected to get elected. I was number 3 on the Yorkshire list, and the opinion polls showed that we wouldn't have had it. And what actually got me elected? Well, it was partly William Hague. You remember In Europe, Not Run by Europe,
yeah,
which everybody really was attuned to. But also, because it was the whole region voting, I think Barnsley Central had about an 11% turnout, and Richmond, at William's own constituency, now Rishi's, I think had a 40% turnout. So although we were behind in the polls, we were picking up good seats in regions like Yorkshire. And so when I arrived, I hadn't really prepared myself at all. And it took me a little while to find my feet, but I sort of found it is. There's a frightening amount of power in the European Parliament, and what was particularly annoying is that, and I know I'm speaking to a journalist now, is that they didn't want to cover any of the serious stories. You'd pass a big regulation about improving bathing water quality, improving air quality, making people safe in all sorts of ways, and the British press just wanted to know about straight bananas and pink sausages. And
well, we know who was responsible for that. It was all Boris Johnson's fault, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, he has quite a lot to we can blame him for it over the years. But yeah, it was, and of course, our French and German counterparts were sort of almost treated. If you're the rapporteur on a big report, you're almost treated like a minister. The British press didn't really understand how important it was, and with the co-decision process, I found myself sat in late night meetings hammering out the details of I think the one I particularly remember is the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Disposal Directive, and we were there at 4 o'clock in the morning hammering out sort of the details of that. I think the big issue at the time was about printer ink cartridges not being able to be reused because they had chips in them, and we thought that they should be able to be reused, and we were falling out till 4 o'clock in the morning. But a lot of power in the European Parliament, and I have to say that the direction of travel when I was there was all about, ever closer union, and that wasn't something that British Conservative members, by and large, supported. I think some of those that had been there for quite a long time were signed up to the deal, but the new influx that came in 99, we were definitely, if not, maybe not out of Europe, but certainly not run by Europe, and that was pretty much what we did for 5 years, trying to sort of hold back the tide a little bit.
You still voted Remain, though, when we came to the referendum in 2016?
Yes, and I mean, I can remember, being a Eurosceptic didn't mean you wanted to leave. That was sort of Farage and the UKIP people. It meant about getting a fair deal. And I think if Cameron had got a fairer deal, we might well have been in a position to sort of sell continuing membership of the European Union. But, I voted to stay because I'm a farmer. And I've got to say the Common Agricultural Policy was just, it was crazy. The fact that we got a tenancy in 1850 meant that we got a big check every Christmas, and we didn't have to do anything really to qualify for that. And if anyone did threaten to touch the Common Agricultural Policy, you'd see German tractors blocking the streets, as we've seen this week, and French peasants burning tyres in the road. So it was a great scheme for farmers. Now, of course, outside the European Union, we have to sort of sing for our supper a little bit more. And, so on my farm, I've got sort of nectar plants for pollinators. I've got bird seed. I've got areas we've taken out of production. There's an awful lot more that we're now doing. We're still getting the support support from the British government, but we're actually delivering these environmental goods. So actually, although it's a lot harder work being a farmer, and you've got to sort of do things and sacrifice land to get the support, being in the CAP was very comfortable indeed for farmers, and that's why I voted to stay.
Well, at least you're honest. At least you're honest. What was it about the impact on you and your life? You've got 2 sons and a daughter. I mean, it's one thing being away in Westminster, being away in Brussels as well. What impact did it have on you and your family suddenly being thrown into this world of politics?
Well, I think it was a big shock, particularly my daughter was quite little at the time. She's the youngest. And I'd been coming in, for a cup of tea at 10 o'clock when we weren't too busy, and around the house, the farm office was in the farmhouse. So it wasn't just a case of me, going to work. It was a case of me being at home all the time, as far as she could see. And, even in harvest, when we were busy, they'd come to the field with refreshments for us. So it was a big shock for them. And I missed quite a lot of their growing up, that if I'd been on the farm, like all my friends and relatives, I would have seen a lot more of that. So there was a bit of a sacrifice, and initially, it was quite a novelty flying to Brussels every week, but that soon wore off. And I think often friends of mine who are in business say, "Oh, you've been to Hong Kong on business? That's like a holiday, isn't it?" No, actually, I just saw the airport and the hotel and a meeting room, and it was a little bit like that quite often in the European Parliament.
Any regrets about all that time away?
Yes and no. I mean, I think I've loved every minute, I have to say, almost every minute. And actually, if I'd not done that, I suspect I'd have probably had regrets. Well, should I have done something different? And if you're a farmer's son, you're often sort of expected to take over the family farm. Your life's mapped out for you. And I actually, drew a new map and did different things. And now, and certainly in my community up in Yorkshire, they all seem very proud of me anyway, and and pleased that I've sort of done my bit. Certainly for the countryside and for the Conservative Party, where most of my friends seem to still vote Conservative.
They're the ones left. Let's turn our attention then to when you arrive in the Commons in 2005. So obviously, great news for you, but the third defeat for the Conservative Party. What was the mood like there in the Conservative Party? And then you had the leadership contest and David Cameron becoming leader, and maybe a slight sense of turning the corner. But what was it like back then?
Well, I think many of them were very depressed, but that didn't really bother us because we just got elected. And, mine was a seat that Labour had held since 97. It was a big surprise that Scarborough and Whitby went Labour in 97, and we were a little disappointed not to get it back in 2001. So when I came in, I'd taken a seat from Labour, and I was, enjoying every, new aspect of being in Parliament. And, of course, I'd never been in government in Westminster, so I didn't really understand then just how depressing opposition is compared to being in government.
And so you then, quite quickly, you were sort of on the front bench. You joined the Whip's office. You were Shadow Roads Minister in the Transport team. Did you enjoy being on the front bench?
Yeah, I did. I mean, being in the Whip's office was fantastic. And in fact, the reason I got moved to Shadow Transport was one Friday when we had private members' bills. That generally in opposition, you don't have a shadow minister for every debate that comes up, every private members' bill. And the first two collapsed quickly, and there was Angela Watkins and I left, and basically we had to do the front bench speeches for about 5 different private members' bills. And Patrick McLaughlin, who was the chief whip, was sat up at home in Derbyshire watching it, and he got Angela and I in on the Monday and said, "Oh, well done holding the fort on Monday. And by the way, Robert, I think you should move to a shadow front bench team where you have a speaking role rather than the whip's office, which, although you do give speeches in opposition, but you weren't really sort of in the front line." So, and I had 3 years at Transport, which was great because we were writing the manifesto for the 2010 election, and many of the policies that we dreamt up and put in that manifesto are now on the statute book, and we're very proud of about some of the things we did. Because when I arrived after the election in 2010, the coalition was formed. So Norman Baker got my job that I should have had, and I went back to the Whip's office
because he was a Lib Dem, and they had to take some of this. And you were one of the victims of the coalition in a way. So well, good news, you're in government.
I was in the Whip's office, and I became pairing whip. But interesting, what happened was when I finally did arrive 3 years later at the Department for Transport, all the heavy lifting had been done, getting, for example, legislation on roadside testing for drugs. We've got some stuff on HGVs. We introduced the HGV levy, so foreign trucks had to pay to use our roads. So when I arrived 3 years later, all the heavy lifting had been done by Norman Baker and Mike Penning, and I was there ready to take the credit, which normally isn't what happens. Normally you do all the hard work and you reshuffled, and somebody comes in and can cut the ribbon on that bypass or launch the legislation.
So you were the one who came and cut the ribbon and took the credit?
I cut a lot of ribbons on a lot of bypasses, but similarly, the projects that I signed off have only just been opened in the last couple of years, and I wasn't there to cut the ribbon.
Just explain. You said you were a pairing whip. For people who don't know, what is a pairing whip?
Well, being pairing whip is you're the one that lets people off to go to important constituency events or to have dinner on their wedding anniversary with their wives, and you work very closely actually with the opposition pairing whip, who's Mark Tarmy, is still there, and it's all about sort of sharing out the numbers. So let's say a select committee is going to a visit to Canada, and there's 4 Labour and 5 Conservatives on that trip. We then pair them off, and that trip is +1, but we had a majority of 83 in the coalition, so we could afford to lose 1 or 2. We had people who were ill. I remember once having a very difficult conversation with a colleague when there was a crunch vote, when I think the Lib Dems weren't with us, in which case it got very tight. And I said to a colleague, well, could you have your chemotherapy on a different day? Now, there aren't too many jobs where somebody who's undergoing cancer treatment is expected to postpone that treatment just so they can come into work. And we had some fairly tough crunch votes. If we had a really tough vote, we had 3 people with golden tickets, which meant that they were not expected to vote unless called in. And I remember once calling across to number 10 and getting David Cameron to come and vote because we thought the Lib Dems were going to abstain or something. Actually, as it turned out, the Lib Dems did vote for us. We got a majority of 80, and David sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, it was a bit close there, Robert, but I'm pleased you got me across.
So who else gets a golden ticket? The Prime Minister?
Prior to my becoming pairing whip, it was the Prime Minister, Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary. But on my first day as pairing whip, Theresa May, who was the Home Secretary, was flying across to Jordan and various places quite a lot to try and, you remember Abu Hamza, we had all that issue. So I actually rang Theresa up on the first day and said, would you like a golden ticket? And she said, what's a golden ticket?
Like
and I
Willy
explained
Wonka.
it, and she said, thank you very much indeed. And I hope that stood me in good stead at subsequent reshuffles when she was Prime Minister.
Well, it did. You ended up at the Home Office, so old Stomping Ground Minister for Education, then you're Minister of State, you were Immigration, then Education, then at DEFRA. So you obviously seem to do okay.
I had a gap between education and DEFRA. I got the DEFRA job when George Eustace resigned, you may remember. And I mean, that was really sort of like a duck to water at DEFRA, I understand. I can remember the first meeting, Minister, what do you know about chlorothalonil? I said, well, it's a fungicide used in wheat, and people are saying it should be banned. And said, oh, well, that means we can go to page 5 of the brief.
I suppose that's your farming knowledge and your time in Brussels and so on meant that you could take to Environment, Food and Rural Affairs like a duck to water.
Yes, I mean, unlike when I went to education, when I'd really not done anything involving education before, and I was sort of starting from a clean sheet, I knew a lot about. I have a degree in agriculture, for goodness sake, so that worked very well. And I was there for 6 months, which coincided with the agricultural show season. And if you're the DEFRA minister, going around the shows, meeting all the farmers, giving speeches,
trying all the food,
exactly. Yeah, drinking the cider down in the southwest. And I was there until Boris became Prime Minister, and I'd backed Jeremy Hunt to be the Prime Minister. So the first meeting I had with Boris after, I got a call to go and see him behind the Speaker's chair. Now, if there's a reshuffle ongoing and you're not walking down Downing Street, you know it's bad news. So I went into the Prime Minister's office, and before he could say a word, I said, oh, Prime Minister, before you say anything, I know why I'm here. And if it's any consolation, Mrs. May sacked me once before, so I'm used to it by now. And he burst out laughing, and I suspect it was the easiest sacking of the day. But, I mean, I've heard of people sort of pleading for their jobs and bursting into tears. I mean, you know, in politics, we've got, 360-something MPs, or we did have, and you've only got 80 front bench jobs. So, you know, you don't expect to be on the squad all the time. You need to understand that you'll spend some time on the bench and get used to that.
Let's turn our attention then in your exit interview, Robert Goodwill. Let's turn to some of your former bosses. Get your assessment on the various bosses you've worked for. So, could you sum up Michael Howard in a word? He was the leader when you arrived as an MP.
Well, Michael Howard got me elected. You know, it was Michael Howard's campaign. You know, we were in serious trouble under Ian Duncan Smith. The polls were bombing, and Michael came in and in a fairly short period made quite a good fist of what had been a bad job. And you know, I'll always be grateful to Michael. He came to Scarborough in the campaign, and he made us look like we were electable again. We didn't actually sort of win the election, but it made us look like a party. And you know, he's a serious politician and such a nice guy as well. So
go on, sum up Michael Howard in a word.
Decent and honourable. That's 2 words.
That's very good. Last week, Charles Walker said he was scary, so he'll probably take decent and honourable. Then along comes David Cameron. Sum up David Cameron in a word.
Very astute, I think. Good politician. I backed David Cameron in that leadership election because when I arrived in Parliament, we were straight into a leadership election. And there were all sorts of people sort of going round. And I probably would have supported David Davis. And if David had picked up the phone and telephoned me, given he's the only one I really knew, he had a Yorkshire seat, I probably would have come on as part of his team. But what happened was actually Derek Conway rang me and he threatened me. He said, if you don't vote for David, it won't be good for you in terms of your career progression. And I thought, well, I'm not used to being talked to like that. David Cameron invited us round to his house, and Samantha was cooking lasagne, and there was a lot of us there, and you could tell half of them were already signed up, and they were there to try and cajole the rest. And the other half of us were there to be lobbied, and I sat on the sort of third step of David's staircase next to him, and he had a chat, and I thought, well, fair enough. I did support Liam Fox in that campaign originally, but when Liam got knocked out, then I went in for David.
And the lasagna worked. I suppose it's a shot, and you know that's been repeated a lot.
It was the way I was approached. I think it made a big difference.
Yeah.
And who could be better as a foreign secretary with his diplomatic skills?
Yeah, lasagna all across Europe.
Yep.
Theresa May in a word.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I've got to know Theresa reasonably well since she stopped being Prime Minister. But when she was Home Secretary, when she was Prime Minister, I didn't really get to know her that well, and I think other colleagues may have the same thing. You know, she was a little bit distant. Maybe because she was always sort of off doing other things and not in the lobby.
She had the golden ticket. She
had a golden ticket, and she wasn't somebody that was in the tea room all the time. And actually, you know, since her office is just down from me in Portcullis House, and actually I bump into her most days, and we're actually reasonably good friends now. In fact, when I got my knighthood, Rishi, who was a chancellor, laid on me a little celebration dinner in number 11, and I invited Theresa along, and actually sat her next to my daughter, which I think was quite an intimidating experience for the ex-Prime Minister.
Okay, so Theresa May, a bit distant, but you're friends now. Sum up Boris Johnson in a word.
Chaotic.
No further questions. I think that we've sort of probably covered that. What about Liz Truss? Liz Truss in a word.
She started off so well. I mean, I'm a natural tax cutter. She just wanted to do everything in the first 2 weeks. The problem was she only got 2 weeks or so to do that. And it was such a shame because, I mean, all during the summer, you know, I'd been going around on Rishi's campaign and she'd be saying we need to cut tax, we need to do, you know, really, you know, come in very radically, you know, in some ways, a little bit like Margaret Thatcher was very radical. And Rishi was saying, well, you'll spook the bond markets, we'll get inflation going through the roof and the economy will bomb. And of course, that's what happened. And I think that's why when Rishi came in as Prime Minister, people thought, well, yeah, our heart said vote for Liz, but actually in our heads we probably thought Rishi's telling us the truth, and so it came to pass. And I feel desperately sorry for her. You know, she worked all her life to get the top job, and then it was snatched away from her in a very cruel way. And politics can be very cruel, particularly when people get to their end of their careers. If you're a minister, you get sacked by the Prime Minister. If you're the Prime Minister, then it's pretty much the parliamentary party that can see the writing on the wall. Yeah.
What about Rishi Sunak then? Rishi Sunak in a word.
Just a genuine guy, really. And I mean, Rishi's got the next constituency to mine. When he was selected, there was a few raised eyebrows, actually, because, we're not renowned for being diverse in North Yorkshire, but Rishi wowed them. I mean, there was no doubt at the selection. I wasn't there, but people were there said, oh, yeah, it was just it was a complete no-brainer. Rishi got almost all the votes. And he arrived in Parliament and he set about, whatever he set about doing, whether that being a backbencher or, as he became quite quickly a minister, he just concentrated on doing it very well. And, he's always been a very supportive friend to me, and I will return that favour as much as I can.
Finally, then, your exit interview, Robert Goodwill, some classic exit interview questions. What did you dislike most about the job?
I think the expenses scandal was the most terrible period. We sat in the tea room having breakfast and opening the Telegraph with trepidation to see who'd been accused. I mean, some of the things people did, if you're a Nigerian politician, you've been accused of buying a tin of cat food using government money, I think most people would laugh quite hard. And that was a pretty torrid time. I didn't sort of have any problems with it, but we all were tarred with the same brush. I can remember going in the supermarket with my wife and people, friends of ours, not strangers, pointing at, are those groceries on expenses? And it became quite embarrassing to be a member of Parliament, and people, and I think there's still quite a lot of that feeling around. So that was the worst time during the expenses. I
suppose that brings on to another classic question: would you recommend the job to someone else? Would you encourage your children into politics, for instance?
Well, I think the problem is my children are on a career path where they probably will be earning more than an MP, and that's a bit of a problem. I have a very good friend in Scarborough who's fantastic. He'd make a great MP, and I said, why not put your name in, get on that? He said, well, why would I take a 50% pay cut, and why would I have my whole personal life and everything open to public scrutiny? A lot of my friends are their own bosses, and that's one thing that my friends in agriculture don't really understand. We're going shooting on Thursday. Would you come with us? No, we've got a 3-line whip.
Yeah.
They're not used to sort of having to sort of jump to other people. I think I would encourage people to go into politics, but I would give them a warning that there's quite a lot of flack. Now we've got, social media, there's some quite nasty stuff out there. Not many people in their normal jobs get death threats, but we've had 3 or 4 over the years. One guy got arrested, another guy lost his job just by making death threats to politicians. These people don't know me. They just sort of saw somebody up there and have a go at them. So, but I mean, it is great, particularly if you get to be a minister. And I've got to say, the best thing about being an MP is being a minister, and the worst thing about being an MP is being in opposition.
Which could well be where some of your colleagues are heading when you step down.
Don't write us off yet.
No, well, finally then, you touched on it, but what will you do next? And tell us about this traction engine that you've bought that you're going to be tinkering with.
Well,
they're big things. We've talked about this before the show. They're big. It's quite a thing to collect.
Well, I'll be doing a lot of farming, and in fact, I bought a brand new tractor in the autumn, which we don't normally buy brand new. So I will be driving that quite a lot, I hope. But yeah, I've got a pair of steam ploughing engines, one of which is pretty much operational. We just need to do a bit of work for its 10-year boiler inspection. The other one needs a lot of work, so I'll be devoting my time to that. And I've also got a steam lorry, which is quite fun on the road. It'll go about 25 miles an hour, so I'll be tinkering with steam engines. And during the summer, I actually went to Holland because I managed to buy a steam plough to go with the engines. You have 2 engines, one each side of the field, and the plough gets winched backwards and forwards. And these ploughs are like hen's teeth to find. I managed to find one, and I went over on North Sea ferries, or P&O ferries as it now is, and picked it up and brought it back. So we're looking forward this summer to doing a bit of steam ploughing, and the summer after, a lot more steam ploughing, because obviously the election will have been by then.
Well, so Robert Goodwill, best of luck with it all.
Thank you very
including
much.
with the steam plough. Thanks so much for joining us for your exit interview.
Thanks, Matt.